And I was like telling them don't even go, and she thought I was being a hater, but then...
I didn't think you were being a hater, I just thought that...
Yeah. Well, the one in Carson when I was going to it, the first room I walked into, there was just bullets all over the floor. Someone told me that they were, in fact, there was one or more weapons sold in the morning.
I went to some crazy sale. It was like a military guy, and I went to look like clothing and stuff. But the people who were there for like guns and military stuff, like that's a whole lot. And the tool guys too, like they're really aggressive.
Yeah.
Some of the gun people show up with all like not like wearing like straps, but like they have like Euro adapt guns, like
Yeah.
range and different hats.
Yeah.
Like, they're super into
This
do you know anything about tools? They don't have anything. There's real money in that.
There's real money, like some of these tools, like you them. Having the BB tools.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a time where we go to the streets and
build out something
Well, you also can't look like it doesn't have a tag on.
I was like, I think it was just to do it like, not brutal style, but just kind of like pile of shirts, you know? That's it.
Yeah, however you want. You have the music off, like.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thanks for
Hey, you want to
Did you want to read the book out loud? Like grade school style? Like, oh, you're talking? Alright, go on. Oh, see.
I wish that Zach and John would have appeared here.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've gotten filled in with the restaurant that was right over there. It was owned by a dude who's in Boston now.
No, but the YDL Tapas place. And how much card did he have in the car? Just scrolling across the. Oh, nice. I only.
Have you been here?
Be a thought.
I saw that
Hey, folks!
You want to turn off the opera? Thank you everyone for coming. This is like a crazy homing thing. I guess we're here to talk about the book. I'm going to read from it a little bit, and then I'm going to talk with the great esteemed Sam Shuby, my old boss at GQ, and just a great writer friend. You know, hell of a guy. And yeah, shirts for sale, books for sale, everything like that. Woo! So I'm going to read a couple of different parts from a couple of different old newsletters. All right. Issue 72, October 1st, 2015. eBay, Patagonia fleece sweatpants, 1970s, $40 unsold. There's a level of clarity one reaches after significant investment in vintage clothing, where the collector realizes they have straddled and then passed the line of wearing garbage. The time, money, and attention I have been putting into my wardrobe has been this whole time an exercise on how best to soak myself in filth. Not actual filth, but is there a difference between wearing used fleece pants and sharing a gym locker against someone's will? Or sleeping in a storage locker, or communal eating? These are fleece pants older than me, in use for longer than I've been alive. Did people wear underwear with their fleece pants, their scratchy fleece pants 40 years ago? The tags on these are 1970s and 1980s. Did people wear them for several days in a row? Or did they wear them like Quebec trappers did for a whole year, only showering on Christmas Eve? Were Patagonia fleece pants in the 70s only worn by serious hikers? Guessing so. Man, these things are awesome. The reminding voices that all this garbage is, that this is all garbage, gets louder the older and filthier and rarer the vintage clothing is. But the deeper the vintage buyer goes down the hole, the less weight that voice carries. Buying and wearing used clothing and bathing in other people's filth is an exercise in mental quietude. Focus on your breathing, a yogi might say. Don't think about the guy who sweated profusely in the pants you just bought. Let your thoughts drift in and out. The pants are older than you and have been used every day for most of that time. Since before you had consciousness, someone was sweating in these pants. There's no wrong way to do this. Check it out. I bet he ran in these. Focus on your breath. Nothing is real. Everything is permissible. Issue 97, September 20. Thank you. September 27th, 2017. eBay, 1970s Champion reverse weave gusset sweats, $90. Woo! There are two kinds of people in the world. People who can turn back and people who can't. I once thought there were people like me and people who were wrong. Vegans and everyone else. People who love burning spear and everyone else. But I was wrong. Taste change and interests don't matter. It takes all kinds. People who felt strongly about burning spear at one point in their lives might feel strongly about something else now. Or they might feel nothing at all. Progress, which is important, comes and goes. In high school, I read a line in old issue Heart Attack, the humorless political punk fanzine, that stuck with me. Kent McClard, who was the zine's editor, wrote in a column that taste was just taste, and it ended with a person. He wrote, and I'm relaying this from memory, that one day I tried to convince my mom for a whole day that Black Flag were the best band of all time. Eventually, I played her the record, and she disagreed. I think after being in enough of these situations, you grow up. But sometimes you can't take progress back. When I bought used sweatpants, I crossed the line and passed a station from which I could not return. Grand Street Bakery on Grand Street in Brooklyn opened in 2010 or 11, and I visited them soon after they opened and searched the store top to bottom for something to buy. I got a pair of Levi 501s made at the Valencia factory with the paper tags on them and 555 on the button for $40 that I ended up selling a year ago for $500. I also found Champion sweatpants, gray with the tag I could date to the 80s with the old logo, white with a red filled in C on the thigh for $10. I bought them and washed them and wore them, probably every day around the house for a few years. Most vintage is used, but these things were very much used, and I could tell that even after running them through the laundry. What did people use sweatpants for in the 80s? I'm not naive. I knew then and I know now. Movie characters went commando wearing sweatpants back then. I'm sure regular Americans did too. Champion was the preferred clothing line of the underclass and of athletes. It was cheap and for sports. Wearing these sweatpants, I was now in agreement with a roofer, a student, each sweaty, most of them nude. Someone who wore these sweats so much before they got to me that I could feel their history for over a year. That occupied my thoughts. I'd come home and put them on. They looked good, and would wonder whether President Barack Obama would win re-election, or if Japan would survive a tsunami, or whether Omar Gaddafi was dead, or if I could go see Judgment play Chaos and Chaos in Austin, and whether it was wrong that I was wearing these things. I'd come home from work, I'd watch and read the news, but my mind would come back to the used sweatpants I was wearing. Unlike the above auction, mine weren't gusseted, which means they weren't triple reinforced and had no extra stitching. They were just regular sweatpants with a Champion tag and a logo. Why did I buy them? The sweatpants in the auction here are what a young priest in The Exorcist were jogging. What Bear Bryant wore on cold September mornings as he watched his Alabama players do jumping jacks, or whatever it was people thought put on muscle back then. Are these used sweatpants in the auction dirty? Do we know someone wore them? Why assume something bad happened? Why assume they were worn? Maybe they were just old. Eventually Obama was reelected, Judgment played, and Gaddafi had allegedly died, and I stopped noticing or thinking about these pants. But by this point they had preoccupied my thoughts to such a degree that I got distracted, forgot to plan my vacation to Texas. Judgment played on a boat on a river, and the guitarist wore leather pants. I wasn't there. So maybe no one wore these in the past 50 years. Maybe no one has worn any of the used sweatpants being bought and sold every day by the scores, dozens, handfuls on eBay. I need another pair of these. I'll buy anything anyone has worn and will wear it. Sold lots of other people. We can wash them, but it's still in a clean way of life. Recommend it. Thank you.
So I was going to start somewhere, but then
Yes.
we were talking about sweatpants and,
There you go.
and how sweatpants are worn. So I want to start there. In the introduction to your book, you described the newsletter as a trade publication for a worthless commodity.
Yeah.
And then there's another line in one of the newsletters that I love where you say that getting good prices on garbage keeps me going. Right? There's this idea that getting bad stuff, but for a good price. It's like the old, Yiddish joke about the food's terrible but such small portions. We're like this store is a testament to the sort of like explosive boom we've seen in prices of vintage clothes and the status of vintage clothes. But there's something in your work and in this book and in the way you and I have talked about all of this, where like it's important that this stuff is garbage. That there's like a special status accorded to things that are garbage. Tell me a little bit about garbage and its place in the vintage world.
Well, there's kind of a lot. Well, there's a little bit of a lot to it. Some of it is just with back then. If you kind of did the handshake and went, buying vintage, and that's what you were wearing, it was sort of unpresentable clothing. It's not stuff that you could wear to an office. It didn't really look good. No, people didn't wear it that much, and if you were wearing it, you were dressing like a flea market vendor or something like that, and you just didn't look kind of presentable. And then the deeper you got into vintage, the more kind of in the margins you would get, and then the more arcane and strange and almost like unflattering the clothing would be. What's the old like cliche about people who work in fashion are the ones who dress the worst because they're just what's that like that crazy Prada shirt from like 2019 with like the box sleeves. Like you wear it, you look insane, and it's just, that's what so much of the vintage was. That to me, it was kind of drawing the line between the fashionable people who looked especially bad in a good way. And then with this, there was the aesthetic thing to it, but there was also part of it was probably me protecting myself and being like, no one wants this stuff. This is like nasty clothes. This is like the convertible pants that I'm wearing right now. This is just like, it's for me. Don't worry about it. You don't like it. It's garbage, but it's like my garbage. And a lot of it too is it was sort of the way the old school kind of vintage sellers would talk, be like, no, you don't like this. No, you don't like this. This is a piece of shit. No one likes these. No one wears the like mustache line Levi's anymore. They're not good. You want the red line stuff. Go over there across the street and pay for it for like $500. You don't want this shit. It's garbage. And they wear it, and I wear it, and that's it. It's the best. Yeah.
Well, it's like everything's gonna wind up being vintage one way or another, right?
100%.
It's not just the stuff that winds up framed or contextualized or curated. Like,
sure.
Everything turns into it.
Well, yeah. In a sense, the word is. I mean, the word means a lot, and when it's used in kind of a business capacity, and when it's used kind of for stories and to sell things, it's just okay. Vintage means something that's old, but it's good enough to have lasted, and it's good enough to have people who are like interested in it and to sell it. And the reason why you sell it is you make money off it, so there's some sort of like value. But the thing that was so interesting about eBay and a lot of vintage that was just these are things that maybe shouldn't be sold. They're worth like $1, and they're more interesting. And also when the way trends would work out, it was. Yesterday's like dollar bin record is what sells for $500 to $1,000, and for me coming into vintage really as someone who used to buy and sell records is just that I wanted to find the kind of dollar bin, pair of pants or shoes or whatever it was, that T-shirt, like the scrap metal T-shirt that like no one should have listed, no one should be buying. I was like, no, I like this one. I think maybe in a couple of years it'll be like an $8 shirt, and then I'll win.
So, I think eBay is separate, right? And while I think you're a wonderful writer, I kind of think your true medium is eBay.
Oh yeah?
Tell me about like your relationship to that platform, where your history starts, what it is that has been so like resonant to you about eBay specifically relative to all the other ways you might like find things.
Yeah, I would buy vintage, the flea markets or whatever, but it was really kind of still is number one eBay. And when I started it, I think I was in college, so maybe like the year 2000. The first purchase, this was like before it was hooked up to PayPal, and you'd have to go to the post office. And because I was living in Canada, I would have to like get an international money order to sell a record, or to buy a record. I remember it was a Season to Risk Starkweather split 7-inch, if that means anything to you. And I was trying to collect all their records, and I went to the post office and got the money order, and I was like, I'm not doing this. This is ridiculous. This is like a lot of work or something. They got the PayPal thing hooked up, I think like 6 months later, and I bought a pair of Nike Ultraman Dunk Highs for like $35. So I remember like the price. And then I was like, I could find this, I can find records on here, I can probably find literally anything I want. And the fact that it was, and things didn't used to be curated really deeply 20 years ago online. It was really just like a bin you would search through, and you had to have the mental acuity to like think of the word and like pick it up and like is it this? What am I searching for? What is it described as? And I would just I would think of something. Oh, I don't like these sets of forks that I have in my apartment. Like, there's got to be something on eBay. So you'd search forks by price, and then you'd search Italian fork or something, and it's so indiscriminate that it leaves it up to the individual for them to find it, and I just kind of like that because I would just have access to it and just do it.
What sticks out to you as like the sort of most surprisingly valuable search term over time that you were like, oh, but like this keeps like giving me weird and interesting stuff?
I'm trying to think. I know I would just search years just without anything at all. I would just search in clothing like a certain year, and I would find stuff. I would search prototype, and I would find things. I'd search like jock worn was like a term that they like used a lot, and like no one used anymore, and you would just find that.
What does that refer to?
I think it's like it was like clothing that people like it was like it was if you wore it to like exercise it. So it was a jock worn pair of like Nike jock worn. That's just what it was.
Got it.
And the number one like weird term that also they don't use anymore is like for old jeans with Hige, Hige, which is like a Japanese term for like the whiskers on the crotch that like just has fallen into arcana. Like no one like uses it. It's not anything. But I would just search Hige, and that was like the best stuff. It was just that was it. And the real one would just be like browsing by category and searching like jeans or like shirt. And then just like having 10,000 things and just be like, I'm doing this for now. You know? And you find maybe one thing if you're lucky.
And so this was already a thing that,
Yeah.
that you were doing, and I assume what kept doing, and at a certain point you start writing a newsletter about the things you're finding, the things you're seeing. Take me back there. Tell me about those early days of like, you know what, I'm going to collect some stuff, I'm going to write about it and publish it.
I was always buying stuff and just getting in everything. I think at any point in time, like whenever I was wearing anything whatsoever, it would just be like there was always at least 2 items like that I was wearing that was like eBay or in the house or anything like that. But a lot of it too was I'd come out of I had a day job, and then I started working at Vice as a sports editor, and I like founded the sports section, but I didn't tell my boss, and then like they got really upset, and they were like, you can't do this anymore. So for a year I didn't write or do anything, and then that year came to an end, and I was like, I've lost my muscle, I don't know how to write anymore. I was like, I need to like write about something, and vintage was sort of blowing up, and people were sort of starting to sell it and write about it, and I just kind of had the same feeling that I had about sneakers, about veganism, about whatever weird shit that I was into, not that early, but like early enough. I felt about vintage, and I was like, all right, I'm going to work on the train. I take the train to work. I'm not really that paid. I was too cool to like get in on the ground floor about sneakers, about this. I was like kind of like, all right, I need to like show that I was here like a little bit early, and then because I'm like such a smart person, I did it through like an email newsletter, you know what I mean, in 2014. It didn't like make any sense. That was just me being like, all right, I know about this stuff, but it's like low stakes, and it's really was a way for me to just kind of be like, all right, you need to be able to like write like X hundred words in 2 days, and just like be able to write, because that's kind of what it was. And then I remember making choices. I was like, well, if there's a good auction that you want for yourself, but it's a good newsletter, you still got to write about it, because like, who cares? Like it'll come around again, but I want the newsletter to kind of be good.
So the letter to me too is a real testament to like the power of looking stuff up.
Yeah.
Just like researching things. There are these constant moments in reading it where it's just like, so I looked it up and I found this found myself in this bizarre rabbit hole, and I learned this and that. Like, tell me in the like, I'm curious about in the context of writing that newsletter, like where research fit in, because there were these opinions, there were strong opinions, and some of them were purely aesthetic judgments, and some of them were, well, I know an impossible amount about this thing, and I somehow came by that information. So what's that balance?
A lot of it was during that 1 year where I wasn't like allowed to write anything. I was just kind of like, all right, well, let me read a lot, and I just started inhaling like just boring old, New Yorker books or back issues, and just not that obscure, mainstream like published books, won Pulitzers or whatever. But I was very interested in journalism as like an aesthetic. I also thought it was like really funny that you could like call someone up and be like, what do you think? And the person tells you that, and I'm like, okay, it's true. That's it. And I was like, this is insane. So, but as I was reading this stuff and inhaling it, I just, in my head, I was just kind of like, all right, I have these opinions about what these jeans are or this thing is, and it's a certain subculture and it's a certain person, but in reality, it's like, I can look it up, I can like talk to someone, I can email them, and like me as a reader, and I kind of had these ideal readers, and one of them was my friend Matt, who was like a journalist, and I was like, if I don't ask this question, just from like doing a little bit of freelance work beforehand, I was like, I kind of failed the piece. So I was like, maybe I'm gonna poke a hole in the button, or in the balloon that says like, these are skinhead jeans or something like that, but I was like, I gotta look it up, because otherwise, like, anybody who kind of knows anything will read it and feel like a little cheated. And then, so because of that, you look stuff up, and a lot of it too was the knowledge I might have had about it was just like, this is just where I was, like, I went to work, I didn't fucking care. I was like, I was into this stuff. Like, this is like what I talked about with my friends, this is what, like, I'd go to the Strand, I'd find books about, like, this is just like what I, like, lived and breathed, and like, this is just, it was like this beautiful aesthetic thing that explained to me kind of, I was like, oh, clothes can be like cool. Like you can represent yourself in this very distilled, tiny little way if you get the right thing or something like that. And that's kind of mostly what it was.
Well, and there's this kind of incredible like social history element too, right? Like so much of the stuff you focus on is a little weird or messed up or surprising or a mistake or a knockoff. And all of those things remind the reader that choices were made at some point down the line. Someone chose to make this thing this way, or that things eventually wound up being made this way because someone chose to do it that way. I'm curious about like, you know, where these things move from pure objects to things that tell us about the way we live.
Yeah, the thing that I found the most, you would always see that there were like glitches, you know, not in the system or to be like dramatic, but you'd see like a bootleg Mickey Mouse, and it would just be, at the time, it was like a very professional button-up era, and like, you know, the economy was kind of, I guess it wasn't doing that well, but like, it felt like it was. And things were kind of, there was a bit of a professionalization of, you know, subculture and so on. And finding these things that were screwed up or bootleg jeans, they were only accidentally, they would accidentally be posted on eBay. So all of a sudden you have this multi-million or billion or whatever, you know, worth corporation, which at the time I remember thinking it was extra funny because the founder of eBay started like an investigative journalism business. So like the two things for me, I was like, oh, it's annoying. And, but the only way you could find this stuff was on the most mainstream website, and it would be a mistake, so it just showed that these things were out there, and the fact that they were hiding in plain sight, to me, made it, one, it was sort of you're into, let's face it, these are just clothes, they're pretty simple. After like a couple of years, you advance and you become more interested in either storylines, or you've seen one pair of like expensive jeans, you've seen them all, and the ones that are also impossible to search on eBay or to find or to request that you really can't buy with money are like the mistakes, or like the bootleg things, or the things that appeal to either business, like people in the rag trade that are like, oh no, I don't need this like Prada thing. I want like the pair of jeans that the guy like sewed a seam on the middle, because how can you even like look? You can't, if there's a vintage people here, if I was like, I want a pair of these, it'd be like, oh, good luck, you know what I mean? I'll text you in like 3 years if I ever run across one. They were just things you couldn't find, which was like kind of neat, you know?
Yeah, no, and you know, some like Nike has a sort of really interesting like status in the newsletter, right? Because it's this all-powerful multinational super company, and yet they're reduced to like, there's a guy or many guys who are bidding against regular people. Tell us about Papa Man.
Man, the Papa Man thing, I don't remember if I think it was like an old Wired article from like the 90s, and then I about how basically you would dig long enough, and it used to be on eBay, that you could like look around and you could find someone's eBay name, and you could find their bid history, and you can find like everything, and it was just, it would personalize these things. And then that's how I would get into, that's how I found out about a lot of things. I found out about, you know, random, I don't want to, Marco's taping, so I don't want to like put it on the record, like who these people were. But like I would find them, I was like, oh, he bought this. Oh, interesting. Oh, he bought this. And so Papa Man was an account that was, I guess, run by the Nike Archives department, and they would just bid on archival like pieces, and it's just like if Nike needed it, they needed it. And at the time, I think Levi's was doing the same thing, and no one really knew what their account was. And the thing that was really neat about Papa Man was like they were kind of like really bad at eBay. They were like sort of incompetent. They would always get outbid, and it's like this was crazy because you're in Portland. Like there's a special line. Like if you're this way, here it is. There's a special line. If you're a Nike employee, you know, like when you go to the airport, and it's just like they run the town. It's like Coca-Cola in Atlanta. They're the mayor, and there was something where they just couldn't really get it together to spend an extra, I don't know, like $180 on a pair of like Blazers from the 70s with the fat belly swoosh that like probably, you know, and who is winning it is like, I don't know, a guy in Japan, a guy in France, like a guy in New York who maybe someone in here knows, like it was real interesting because it was this thing where it was like, it was the limits of like what a company could do, and it was the limits of like money. But at the same time, they could have, if they didn't have a balance sheet, and if they were just like being creative about it, they could have just wiped everyone out, bought everything, had like a much better archive. I think that's what Levi's does, maybe, you know. Nils, what do you think? No, I don't know. I think it maybe it just shows also how maybe these things aren't worth that much.
Right, well, I think it's a pair of striped socks, right? Like striped tube socks that wind up going for $130 or something.
Which is amazing.
And it's like, well, objectively, these cannot be worth that.
Right.
And the only way people come to think that they're worth that is if Nike starts bidding it up because they need it. So, and then everyone's like, oh, I guess these must be worth something. I guess I want them.
Well, with them it was weird because they weren't interested in the market value of these socks. They were just kind of like, all right, well, we're going to make these socks in like spring, summer 2015. Right. So we need to bid these things up, and they're bidding against like a guy who owns a store who can sell these socks for $300. Which is that's the cool part. It's just you would sell stuff. I remember selling a pair of used Vans with like the film strips, like the Dick Tracy stuff, you know, on the sides, and like for $300. And which means to like a store in Japan, which means that they were selling it for like $500, which is like really good. And Nike can't compete with that.
So one more Nike bid is that there's the Air Decade pops up.
Yes.
At one point, this is the Heaven's Gate.
Oh
Nike.
yeah, right.
Tell me about the Heaven's Gate Nike and how this becomes like an object of cult eBay fame.
Well, the cool thing about those shoes is it was a real crazy. What happened? Heaven's Gate. There was like a ritual. I think they were like around here somewhere, and there was like a ritual suicide, and they were all wearing Nikes. But this was in the mid-late '90s, and they were wearing old school Nikes with big fat swoosh. It was kind of out of it. And then folks weren't really into Nike. I guess subcultural, left to center, quote unquote political folks or something. There was like Nike. In the 90s, if you heard Nike, it was like Nike, slave labor, child labor. That's it. People didn't wear Nikes that just didn't exist. So when this happened, it was this insane comical moment at the time, and there were like Adbuster spreads and just do it with the like shoes on the bed and everything like that. But there was also like sort of this gray area where like no one knew, no one really cared enough to dig around like, hey, what shoes exactly are those? We just know they're Nikes, and then digging around, I think it might have been my friend Cole who's here, was like, hey, these are online, like you should write about them, or maybe friend B or something. And then the cool thing about that was I looked it up, and they were this obscure kind of mid-'80s like lower level Nike with like a shitty sort of like foam sole, like just they never retro these, they're just like kind of not so good. But the guy who I guess was the PR person for Heaven's Gate is just still around and available, and he emailed me back in like 5 minutes, and I kept on hitting him with follow-up questions, and he was like, oh yeah, like Ty and Doe, which was the name of the cult leaders, he's like, yeah, he went over to the Savers on like, you know, Melrose, and he like bought them, they were like $13 each, the receipt was like $255 this, Ty wore a size 9.5, and I was, this is just crazy. And for me at the time, I was just like, I should be like, I don't know what kind of career move this is for me, because this is just like, this is objectively like cool. This is an insane story, but it's like, it's not a big story, it's just fucking weird. But I don't know if it's like, why be normal weird or just like cool weird? And it was me kind of speaking towards the subculture stuff was just starting to get disseminated online. But like everyone was sort of missing the point. and I was just like kind of like, all right, I don't know if not anyone, I don't know if there's going to be a mainstream appreciation of this, but I was like, I'd like to just get this on the record somehow. This is just like this strange.
So another weird pair of sneakers that
Yeah.
pops up is the like the famous Apple sneakers, which you write about having basically accidentally bought for $10,000.
Yes.
Did that happen?
Yeah, it happened for sure. I had to like ask him to retract the bid, and he was just like, I was like, hey man, I'm writing about this. I'm sorry, I want to retract the bid. He's like, another writer is like writing about this. This other dude bid on it like a week ago, and I had to retract it. I was like, oh cool. Where is he from? What is he writing for? He's like, I think like Hasnabadi. I'm not sure, man. He didn't tell me. I was like, okay, cool. And the reason why I did that is it used to be for a while. Used to be able to see who bid. eBay was like a totally transparent data marketplace. It was insane. It was just, you could see what everyone bid for everything. You could see everyone's buying and selling history, everything. And then they started getting rid of that, and it started becoming more privatized. But if you bid on something, you could see what you could see who else bid on it. So there was like this 5-year period where I was in the habit of anything that was worth anything that I was interested in, I would just bid on it. So I could see like what happened to it. So there was like a Chunk King, which is this very expensive record that I bid, I don't know, like $9 for, and I think it ended up, they go for like $2,500 now or something. So I just had this history of like, you lost the Chunk King, you lost this pair of like dead stock Levi's like from 1905, and then I guess I underestimated or overestimated myself, and I won a pair of the Apple like $10,000 sneakers, and then I think he ended up selling them for like $600 or something. But yeah, it was really just for me, so I could go onto eBay and be like, oh, who actually won these?
Right.
Or
Who's
like
interested in them?
Yeah, who's interested in it? And I'll be like, and what's he buying or what's he selling?
So, Sammy, weren't you able to like message the winner?
I think, man, I might have.
I think I'd done that once. Like, I'm
Oh
like,
yeah,
you won this.
You
Can I
could see who
message
the
you?
winner was. Yeah, oh yeah, on eBay, yeah. They
Can I
did
buy
it for a
it?
while, and then be like, hey man, I'm sorry, like I missed this. Like, my brother's birthday is coming up. Like, you can sell it to me, you know? They'd be like, yeah, for sure. The Chromax shirt there, that's like how I want it. I was like, dude, my brother. I was like, can I get this from you? I'll give you like $5.
So, one of the really interesting things about reading so many of the letters stacked up at once is that personal details and anecdotes and little moments just start to accumulate and leak out, and you're sort of conscious of, oh, this isn't just like a dispassionate account of like some stuff on eBay. This is like a character. There's a narrator.
Yeah.
Tell me about the narrator of the newsletter. Who is you, but who is also a character?
Well, what's I think it's like the Steve Allen line. It was just like my writers write me, and the me that they write is more me than the actual me, if that makes sense. But there was some sort of like kind of, not artifice, but I had kind of these editorial rules that I would do, and I was like, you're not allowed to talk about anything that's viral or anything that was like online or people are discussing that month, because I don't want to. I'm like a big, I was and I still am like a big Best Show on FMU fan, and I remember he did this thing where it's like, they modernized movies, and he was watching like, I don't know, Much Ado About Nothing, and they start talking about Groupons or something, and I was like, I want this to not be a reflection of 2014 Q1, I want it to be about X, Y, and Z. But the one thing that was the narrator, I guess I tried to do with that was I just tried to be like not negative and not like overly critical and just kind of positive, because in the very early newsletters, and I maybe one or two, I'd be like, oh well, this is this trend, it's like not that cool. This is this. People are into X, Y, and Z, and the people who wear that tend to be, and a lot of it was just me by trying to not make this newsletter this kind of like too cool for you, like kind of like these things are like, I don't like the way the people who wear these clothes are turkeys, because clothes and subcultures, they mean a lot, and they explain like who someone is and stuff. And when we're young, that's how we like kind of talk about people. And a lot of it was just like, I don't want this newsletter to be like dispatches from like a crabby old guy who's like, oh, I'm at the end of vintage, but like, you know, the people who wear that are like lame. I was like, let me try, and if I don't like something, I won't cover it, and then maybe I'll come across in the 100, episodes, in the 100 newsletters, like, oh, you didn't talk about this, but a lot of it was just me trying to be more positive than I was at the time, which I think maybe made me a little more positive over time, because it lived,
Yeah. What sticks out to you when you stick 100 of them together? What story or theme or narrative emerges?
I think a lot of it was, me wrestling with just kind of like against what was going on at the time, because I sort of didn't want to give in to whatever, or not, which is a strange thing to say. I shaped vintage at the time. The way I thought about vintage is it was kind of at loggerheads with designer clothing, because it was the true essence of, it was closer, it was a more specific expression of clothing, because everything that was designer or what have you would just had some vintage analog. So I was trying to find that. And then a lot of it, what it is, was the stuff that I maybe am more proud of is just thematically the newsletters started getting a little better, and I was better at being brief in descriptions, or I was able to kind of unspool the thread and get shaggier without losing the plot. And I think in a lot of ways the big thing for me was I was just like, I got a little bit better at writing, and after a while I was just kind of not even sure. Less interested in the clothes, and it just kind of became more Baroque, and it was just about, I don't know, like my thought process about my life after like bidding on Jerry Only's bass or something.
What's like an eBay regret that stands out to you?
There were a
all
few.
these years later?
I don't like remember. I try not to remember them because it's just like I'll have to. There's just a lot of like losses. But the number one thing that I've never been able to like track down or like confirm was, I think it was like in 01. So early in my eBay days, I was like, and I was a student, so I was like broke as shit. There were a pair of like Jordan 3, like sweatpants, but with like the Gaetano Pesci, like, or no, with the Soxus, like, Bacterio, like cement print on the sides that I, bid $22 on, and they went for like $24 or something like that. And I've just like, I've never seen them in a book. I've never seen them in a flea market. I've never seen like them reproduced in any capacity, in any single way, like ever. No one's ever heard about them. There's just like, I don't think they were the only ones, but they were just, for the novelty of it, I was like, oh, gee whiz, like, I wish I had that. And then as far as clothing stuff, there was a pair of cool Foremost jeans a few years ago that I never saw my size. I remember seeing a guy at the first Inspiration flea in New York, like wearing them in like 2011, early days vintage, and I was like, I'm going to get these for myself. And 8 years later, it was like before the pandemic, they went for like $400, and I was like, that's a little too rich, and I'll never see them.
You never know.
Yeah.
Should we do Q&A some questions?
Yeah, any questions?
We also don't have to do questions.
Yeah, we don't have to.
So you said 2000 you started kind of shopping on eBay. What's your feedback like?
It's not. I'm not even at 1,000. It's like not even that high. I think I have like the yellow star or something like that. It's pretty good. Well, the thing is that they changed it like 5 years ago, where you can't leave negative feedback for like a bidder. So that would happen to me like now and then. I'd like buy something and they like would, or I would decide not to pay for it or something like that. I had one guy get really upset and try to block me because I forgot. Now it's a thing on eBay where you see your message history with the seller for one thread, but I just asked him for measurements on this one shirt, like I guess like every 6 months. And he was like, if you ask me again, he's like, I'm blocking you. He's like, leave me alone. He's just like, hide or just leave me alone.
I have that relationship with the seller who's been selling like the Best Wishes Chromax hoodie on there for like 12 years.
Oh yeah,
And he still has it up, and he's like, I'm willing to trade for some records.
sure.
I'm like, dude, I don't have anything. I just want it for $100 less. You've had it up for the same price for.
Yeah,
12
what
years.
records does he want? Yeah. He's like,
I
I want
wouldn't
the Carl Sagan Moon record, the actual one. You know, I want like the Chunky, Snake Loss.
But I ask him every 3 years, and it's funny that the messages are like, it's like a poem at this point. You know?
Some of these items have been there, like some of those buy nows have been there for like
Yeah.
15, 18 years.
Same
It's like
pictures.
cool.
It's
Yeah,
like all
yeah.
rotting.
I remember there was a guy who had remember on the 01 Jordans, it would say number X of blank.
Yeah.
And this was when before I did the newsletter, 10 years before when I was doing a fanzine, we found the one that was like number 1 out of like 27,000. And I was like, hey man, can I interview you about this? I was like 21. And he was like, leave me alone. So, not much has changed. Alright, well shit, I guess that's it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
It was so fun.
Like in real life, dude, no, like
Just gotta get the signing, you know.
Oh yeah, please.
Just your writing or more like more illustrated?
Both, yeah. I'm trying to get Shining Light to